Before Harry Potter learned that strange things were called magic, he learned that the world could sometimes be persuaded. It did not happen with thunder. It did not happen in the grand storybook way children imagine impossible powers. It happened in the cramped dark of the cupboard under the stairs, where a boy lay beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of dust and old soap, and discovered that if he was hungry enough, the loose biscuit tin in the kitchen might rattle until Aunt Petunia noticed she had forgotten to feed him. That if he was frightened enough, Uncle Vernon's hand might miss his shoulder by an inch and slam into the wall instead. That if he wanted very badly not to hurt Dudley, laughing outside the door. Harry did not know what he was doing. He only knew what it felt like. It was like holding his breath under water and finding that the water held its breath too. The house at number 4 Privet Drive had a way of arranging itself around other people. It swelled for Vernon Dursley's temper, for Petunia Dursley's busy outrage, for Dudley Dursley's greed and noise. It shrank for Harry. He learned this before he learned to read. If he stood in a doorway, he was in the way. If he laughed, it was too loud. If he asked a question, it was impertinent. If he bruised, which he often did, he was clumsy. If Dudley bruised him, which happened more often still, then he must have provoked it. So Harry became quiet. Quiet boys, he found, could hear other things. He heard the hiss of the pipes when winter settled. He heard the floorboards complain beneath Vernon's step and go respectfully still beneath Petunia's. He heard the cupboard latch each night after it fell. And after enough nights, he began to hear something more. Not the sound itself, but the idea of it. The small metallic certainty that it was only a piece of shaped metal, and nothing in the world required it to remain down if he did not wish it. The first time he lifted it by wanting to, he did not mean to do it. He had been 6. Vernon had shut him in early because Dudley had howled over a broken toy racing car, and Petunia had decided it must be Harry's fault, though Harry had not touched the thing. He had lain in the dark with his stomach twisting and stared at the thin line of light under the door, and with all the fierce misery of a child who possesses nothing, he had wished only for not here. The latch had risen. Not quickly. Not dramatically. It had lifted with a faint, careful click, like someone trying not to wake the house. Harry had sat up so fast he banged the back of his head on the low wall. For a moment he thought there must be someone outside. He whispered, "Hello?" No one answered. The line of light remained pale and still. He pushed. The door swung open. He stood on the landing in his socks, trembling from the sheer size of the thing. Then Petunia came out of the kitchen carrying a tea towel and stopped as if she had walked into a wall. Harry remembered the look on her face long afterward. It was not anger. Anger, he knew. Anger was easy. It had volume and shape and words that could be learned. This was older than anger. This was fear. "How?" she said, and the word came out thin and scraped raw. Harry looked at the latch. It hung harmlessly down, polished by years of use. "I don't know." Petunia's fingers tightened on the tea towel until the knuckles blanched. Something very like hatred flashed through her face, but behind it something else moved, swift and ugly and wounded. Her mouth folded inward. For one absurd second, Harry thought she might cry. Then Vernon's voice boomed from the sitting room, asking where his dinner had got to, and the moment broke. Petunia seized Harry by the arm hard enough to bruise. "You do not do that in this house," she said, each word clipped to the bone. "Do you hear me?" "But I didn't." "You do not." He had never heard her sound so certain about anything. After that, Harry began to pay attention. He discovered that it was harder to make things happen when he was panicked. Fear made everything burst. A burst was no good. Bursts got noticed. Bursts broke plates, snapped closed pegs, sent Dudley sprawling downstairs to shriek for his mother. Bursts brought Vernon. What worked better was the narrow, calm sort of wanting he used when he watched spiders descend from the ceiling in patient silver lines. A spider did not leap. It lowered itself precisely. He tried to think like that. When Dudley stole his toast one morning and held it over his head, Harry stared not at Dudley but at the toast and imagined it already in his own hand. It flew back so suddenly it smacked into Harry's fingers and dropped jam side down onto the linoleum. Dudley bellowed. Vernon lunged up from his chair. "What did you do?" Harry, who was as startled as anyone, only stared at the toast bleeding strawberry jam into the floor. Petunia looked from the jam to Harry, and then away so quickly it was almost a flinch. Nothing more was said, but that night his blanket disappeared from the cupboard. He learned from that too. He learned that people might fear what they could not name, but they hated what made them feel powerless. He learned not to look directly at things when he wanted them. He learned to bury his hands under his arms so no one could accuse him of touching what he had not touched. He learned, above all, that magic, though he did not yet know the word, liked stillness. It rose best out of quiet. That was why Dudley never noticed anything until it was too late. Dudley was all appetite and impact. He crashed through the house. He crashed through games. He crashed through people. When he took one of Harry's few possessions, it was not because he wanted it, but because Harry did. On Harry's 7th birthday, if it could be called that, Dudley found a tin soldier in the gutter that Harry had scrubbed clean and kept hidden behind a pipe beneath the sink. It had a bent bayonet and no paint left on its face, but it was a thing that was his. Dudley pinched it between 2 fingers and grinned. "Look, Mum, the freak's got rubbish." "Give it back," Harry said. Dudley snapped the soldier in half. Harry did not think. The world narrowed to the tiny jagged line where the metal had broken. A pulse ran through him, hot and clean. Dudley yelped and dropped both pieces. The soldier hit the floor, twitched, and drew itself together with a soft, metallic kiss. For a long, bright second, all 4 of them stared. Vernon pushed back his chair so violently it screeched. Petunia's teacup rattled in its saucer. Dudley began to howl. Harry snatched up the soldier and backed toward the door. He had no plan. There was nowhere to run. The kitchen seemed to tilt under the force of Vernon's fury. "You filthy little..." The light above them burst. Glass rained into the sink. Petunia screamed. Dudley ducked under the table. In the instant of confusion, Harry fled, heart battering his ribs, and spent the next 3 hours crouched behind the bins in the side passage, while the evening cooled and the smell of cut grass turned damp and metallic under the dark. When Petunia finally found him, she did not drag him. She stood over him in her apron and slippers, her face ghost pale in the moonlight. "You are not like him," she said. Harry, who had no notion whom she meant, hugged his knees and said nothing. "You are not," she repeated, and now her voice cracked. "Not if I can help it." Something in her expression then was so nakedly miserable that Harry felt absurdly the impulse to comfort her. The impulse vanished the moment she yanked him up by the wrist and marched him back inside. He learned another rule that summer: never let Aunt Petunia see more than a flicker. He obeyed it as well as he could. But obedience had never much interested the world when it came to Harry. His hair still grew overnight after Petunia hacked at it with kitchen scissors. Socks that were too small loosened by morning. Once, cornered by Dudley and 2 larger boys at the school fence, he found himself perched on top of the railings without any memory of climbing. The boys gaped at him. Harry gaped at the ground 6 feet below. "Did you jump?" one of them said. Harry looked at his scraped hands and knew with a strange cold certainty that he had not jumped at all. He had simply refused to stay where they had put him, and something invisible had agreed. The house noticed his refusals. Sometimes doors jammed against Vernon and opened for Harry on the first try. Sometimes Dudley's cupboard of sweets smelled so powerfully of rot that Petunia threw half the stash away, furious and bewildered, while Harry kept his face smooth over the bubbling little spark of satisfaction in his chest. Sometimes the dog in the next garden whined and wagged whenever Harry passed, as if some secret scent clung to him. At night he would lie awake and test the edges of his small power. Not enough to be seen. Never enough for the walls to shake or the bulbs to burst. A marble drawn across the floor. A sock coaxed from beneath the bed. The cupboard latch, lifting and settling. lifting and settling, soundless as breath. He had no language for it, but he possessed instinct, and instinct is the oldest language in the world. By the time he was 8, Harry knew 3 things with perfect certainty. He knew that Privet Drive wished very much to pretend he did not exist. He knew that Aunt Petunia's fear of what he could do went deeper than Uncle Vernon's blustering disgust. And he knew, with the solemn absolute knowledge that only children can carry, that if he ever wanted to survive in that house, he must become better at this thing no one had taught him. He did not know that someone else had already begun to watch. Arabella Figg's sitting room smelled of cabbage, lavender water, and cat fur warmed on a windowsill. Harry hated it, which was one of the reasons Petunia liked sending him there when she and Vernon wanted a free afternoon with Dudley. Mrs. Figg's carpet scratched through his socks. Her photographs were all of cats. Her biscuits were stale, and her stories wandered nowhere interesting. That autumn, however, Harry began to understand that Mrs. Figg was different from other grown-ups in a way that had nothing to do with the number of tabbies occupying her furniture. The first hint came when one of the cats climbed directly into his lap the moment Petunia left. Harry had never known cats to do that. They usually tolerated him at best. This one kneaded his knees, looked into his face with unnervingly human seriousness, and settled as if he belonged there. Mrs. Figg, shuffling in from the kitchen with a tray, stopped short. "Well," she said. Harry stroked the cat because not stroking it felt rude. "Sorry. Don't apologize to me. He's choosy, that one." The cat purred harder. They drank weak tea. Harry sat on the edge of the sofa with the caution of a child accustomed to being blamed for broken things. Mrs. Figg asked him about school. Harry said it was fine. She asked whether Dudley still bothered him. Harry said everyone bothered him, which made one of the corners of her mouth twitch. Then, as she reached for the sugar tongs, she winced and clutched at her wrist. Oh, drat the thing. Without thinking, Harry looked at the sugar bowl and wished it nearer. It slid over the tablecloth and rose a finger's breadth off the wood. Not high. Not far. Just enough. Mrs. Figg went still. The sugar bowl settled. Harry felt the blood leave his face. He knew that stillness in adults. It almost always came before shouting. But Mrs. Figg did not shout. She set her hand very deliberately beside her saucer and looked at him over the steam of her tea. Her eyes were watery with age, but there was nothing weak in them. "Does that happen often, dear?" Harry's first instinct was to lie. Years of Privet Drive had taught him that truth was an expensive luxury. Yet, something in the old woman's voice was different. She sounded neither horrified nor curious in the cruel way people often were when they wanted a freak to perform. She sounded as if she'd been expecting an answer to a question that mattered. "Sometimes," he said. "When you're angry." He considered. "Sometimes. And sometimes when you aren't." Harry nodded. Mrs. Figg leaned back. Her expression did not soften exactly, but it altered. Whatever she had seen in him, it did not repel her. That, more than anything, unsettled him. "What does it feel like?" she asked. The question was so strange that he nearly laughed. No one had ever asked how anything felt. Not bruises. Not hunger. Certainly not this. He searched for the shape of it. Like... He frowned at his hands. Like things are already doing it, before they do. Mrs. Figg inhaled very quietly. "And can you stop it?" "Yes." "When?" "When I'm careful." That seemed to matter to her most of all. She said nothing for a long time after that. One of the cats jumped onto the arm of her chair and fixed Harry with slit green eyes. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. At last Mrs. Figg rose, joints cracking. "You stay there. Have another biscuit." "Nani, Gamma." She went into the back room and closed the door. Harry heard the faint scrape of a drawer, the rustle of paper. When she returned, her face wore the same expression Aunt Petunia sometimes got while reading letters she did not intend Vernon to see. Pinched, inward, resolve. "Your aunt knows, doesn't she?" Mrs. Figg said. Harry hesitated. "About things happening." "She knows more than that." He thought of Petunia standing over him in the side passage, white as chalk beneath the moon. I think so. Mrs. Figg lowered herself back into her chair. Then listen to me, Harry. Some people are frightened of what they don't understand. Some are frightened because they understand it better than anyone. There's a difference. He did not know what to say. I want you to be very careful, she continued. Not because you're wicked, mind that, because you're not. But because people do foolish things when they're frightened, and your aunt and uncle are champions in the field. Harry had known that already. Hearing it from another adult still felt like a door opening somewhere inside him. Mrs. Figg's visits changed after that, though not outwardly enough for Vernon or Petunia to notice. She still told dull stories. She still offered stale cake. But when Harry went there, she no longer made him sit staring at cat photographs for entire afternoons. She gave him odd little tasks instead. "Fetch me the red tin from the shelf, would you?" she would say, though the red tin sat much too high to reach. Harry would look at it. The tin would tremble, slide, and drop neatly into his hands. "Good," Mrs. Figg would murmur, as if he had tied his shoes properly for the first time. Once she put a cracked saucer on the table and said, as if to herself, "Shame to waste perfectly nice china." Harry looked at the crack. He did not touch it. After a moment it drew together, leaving only the faintest white seam. Mrs. Figg closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they shone. "Careful," she repeated. "Always careful." If Harry had been older, he might have understood that she was testing not only whether he could work strange things, but how he worked them. His magic did not leap and snarl as some children's did. It threaded. It answered intention. It behaved more like a hand already practiced in writing than a fist pounding on a locked door. To Harry, it simply felt better to do a thing quietly than loudly. He found places to practice. The garden shed when Vernon was at work. The patch of narrow shade behind the bins. The public park at hours when no one watched him. He learned to send pebbles spinning into his palm, then send them back. He learned to stop a falling apple before it struck the ground. He learned that living things were harder than dead ones and people hardest of all, not because they were stronger, but because something in him recoiled from pushing at them directly. He was relieved to discover the recoil. It felt like proof that he had not become what Petunia feared. Yet he was still a child, and children under pressure erupt. The school roof happened in November. Dudley and his gang cornered him near the bicycle shed after lessons, half for sport and half because the afternoon was dull, and Harry was always available for the use of other people's boredom. Pierce Polkus had Harry by the sleeve. Dudley shoved him between the shoulders. There was brick behind him, cold and unyielding. The sky hung low and white above the yard. "Got nowhere to go, have you?" Dudley sang. Harry, who had learned long ago that pleading only sweetened the game, did not answer. He looked past Dudley's thick neck at the guttering that ran up the side of the school wall, and thought with a clarity so pure it was almost peace. Not here. The world gave. One moment brick scraped his shoulder blades. The next he was sitting astride the roof ridge with dead leaves skidding around him in the wind. Below, the boys stared upward, mouths hanging open. A teacher screamed. Harry clutched the slates and felt his stomach drop through the soles of his shoes. He had not climbed. He had not even felt himself move. He had simply ceased to be where he was. By the time the headmaster had shouted for a ladder and a cluster of adults stood below gesturing and arguing, Harry's wonder had burned away under the familiar acid of dread. There would be questions. There would be accusations. There would be home. Petunia opened the front door before he reached it that evening, as if she had been waiting behind the frosted glass for the exact moment of his arrival. Her face had the bleached, rigid look of a woman holding herself together by threads. "What did you do?" "Nothing. Do not lie to me." Something in him sharpened. "I didn't jump." Petunia's eyes flashed. No, I expect you didn't." Vernon barked from the sitting room. "What's he done now?" She did not answer him. She looked at Harry with such naked revulsion and grief that the old nameless ache in his chest stirred. "Your mother used to do things," she said. Awful little things. Petals opening when they shouldn't. Teacups hopping. Doors listening. She smiled about it, as if the world owed her applause. Harry's breath caught on the word mother. Petunia had almost never used it. What's she like? Petunia's hand flew to her mouth as though the question had struck her. Then the fury came, hot enough to scorch. She was selfish, Petunia snapped, and proud, and strange, and I will not have her strangeness in my house. The hall clock stopped. It did not slow. It did not falter. One instant it ticked. The next it stood silent, the pendulum hanging motionless in mid-swing. Petunia saw it. Her expression changed from anger to stark alarm. Harry saw it too, and in that instant understood with awful vividness that his feelings could reach past him now, could press outward into wood and brass and the air itself if he let them. He swallowed the anger so hard it hurt. The pendulum dropped. The ticking resumed. Petunia stepped back from him. That evening she sent him to bed without supper, but she did not force him into the cupboard. She shut him in Dudley's second bedroom instead, still half full of broken toys and outgrown things. Harry sat on the edge of a bed too soft for him and stared at the wallpaper until the moon moved across it. Later, after the house had fallen quiet, he heard a tap at the window. Mrs. Figg's smallest tabby crouched on the sill, eyes reflecting green in the dark. Tied to its collar was a strip of paper with only 3 words written in a spidery hand. Be very careful. Harry read the words twice, then folded the paper into the palm of his hand. The cat meowed once and vanished into the night. A week later, Mrs. Figg broke her leg, or so Petunia announced with considerable annoyance on the morning of Dudley's birthday outing. As a result, the Dursleys had no one to leave Harry with. Try not to ruin everything, Petunia said as Vernon herded them all toward the car. Harry, looking out at the pale sky and feeling some new pressure gathering just beyond the edge of the day, thought that things had already begun to ruin themselves. The snake at the zoo was the first creature Harry had ever met who seemed as lonely as he felt. It lay behind thick glass in a dim enclosure painted to resemble jungle leaves. Dudley had spent the better part of 10 minutes banging on the pane and demanding action from it. When the snake ignored him, Dudley sulked away toward the ice cream stand, dragging Vernon in his wake. Petunia followed with her handbag and her air of thin-lipped martyrdom, leaving Harry momentarily alone in the hush. He crouched in front of the glass. The snake opened one golden eye. Sorry, Harry said, because apology came more easily to him than greeting. The eye did not close. Harry had the odd impression of being inspected. Boring in there? He asked. To his astonishment, the answer came back, not in words exactly, but in meaning sharp as cool water. Very. Harry blinked hard. The snake lifted its head a fraction. Its tongue tasted the air. Never been to Brazil? Harry whispered, reading the sign beside the tank. The snake's gaze drifted to the painted trees and back to him. Never been anywhere. Harry did not smile often, but he smiled then. There was something so dry and dignified in the complaint that he could not help it. Me neither, he said. Behind him, Dudley gave a yell. Mom, Dad, he's doing something to it. Harry twisted round. Dudley was charging back toward the enclosure, face flushed with indignation at being excluded from any spectacle that involved Harry. Petunia was hurrying after him. Vernon thundered in their wake, already angry without needing reason. The moment tightened. Harry did not want Dudley's fists in his ribs afterward. He did not want Vernon's roaring. Most of all, with the sudden fierce protectiveness children feel toward anything gentler than themselves, he did not want Dudley banging on the glass again. He looked at the barrier between him and the snake and thought, only not there. The glass vanished. There was no shatter, no spray of fragments. One instant it stood, gleaming under the enclosure lights. The next it was simply gone, as though the air had remembered it had been empty first. Dudley, who had thrown his weight forward expecting resistance, let out a shriek and pitched headfirst into the tank. Chaos erupted. Petunia screamed. Vernon lurched for Dudley. People all around them shouted and stumbled away. The snake rose in one smooth, magnificent line from the warm rocks. For an awful second, Harry thought it would strike. Instead, it slid past Dudley's kicking trainers, paused by Harry's elbow, and brushed his wrist with a body cool and muscled as flowing water. "Thanks," it told him, the meaning curling through his head with unmistakable satisfaction. Then it was gone, disappearing through a tangle of fleeing legs. Somehow, and Harry never entirely knew whether he did it or merely wished it, the glass returned before the keepers reached them. Dudley had to be hauled, shrieking and muddy, from a tank that by rights should have had no opening at all. Vernon grabbed Harry by the shoulder so hard his nails bit through the fabric of his shirt. "What?" Vernon said in a voice thick with murderous restraint. "Did you do?" Harry could not answer, not because he did not want to, but because there was suddenly too much truth in him and no safe shape for any of it. The weeks that followed were worse than any he could remember. Dudley embellished the story at school until Harry had apparently summoned a giant python to swallow him whole. Petunia watched Harry as if he might burst into flame at breakfast. Vernon addressed him only as boy and only at a roar. Yet beneath the ordinary cruelty of Privet Drive, something new had entered the house. Strain. It began with the letters. The first came through the letterbox on a Tuesday morning, skidding over the doormat with the day's bills and circulars. Harry, clearing the hall under Vernon's orders, saw at once that one envelope was different. Thick parchment, emerald ink. His name, Mr. H. Potter. The smallest bedroom. 4 Privet Drive. Little Winging, Surrey. For a second the hall seemed to sway around him. No one wrote to Harry. No one knew him. No one, in all the gray circumference of his life, had ever sent him anything. Vernon saw the direction of his gaze, snatched the letter up, and stared at the writing. The color drained from his face so quickly it was almost theatrical. Petunia. She came running. For an instant, husband and wife stood shoulder to shoulder, reading the envelope as one might read a death sentence. Then Vernon ripped it in half. Harry flinched as if something had torn inside his own chest. Not from sentiment, from pressure. The letter had felt unlike paper before Vernon touched it. It had felt warm, purposeful, like a knuckle rapping on the locked door of his life. More letters came the next day, and the next. Under the door, through the slot, hidden in egg cartons, rolled into milk bottles. Vernon hammered boards over the letterbox. The letters slipped under the kitchen window. He shouted until the veins stood in his neck like cords. Petunia burned them unread. Dudley found the whole business thrilling until one envelope landed in his soup. Harry did not see most of them. He felt them. At night, lying rigid in his narrow bed, he sensed the approach of each new wave like tiny impacts against the skin of the house. Something out there knew his name. Something refused to be put off by bolts or timber or Vernon's incandescent denial. It made the hair rise along his arms. When Vernon finally packed them all into the car and drove like a hunted man through the rain, Harry sat in the back seat pressed against a suitcase and watched Surrey vanish under a wash of gray sky. Petunia kept twisting around to stare at him, then at the road, then at Harry again, as though he might be secretly summoning the pursuing flood of envelopes by smiling in the wrong direction. They ended on a miserable rock in a black sea, in a hut that trembled under the wind. The birthday was Harry's, though no one mentioned it. Vernon stalked the floorboards, muttering about no postman finding them here. Dudley snored under 2 blankets. Petunia sat with her mouth pinched shut, looking not at Harry but at the storm. At midnight there came a thud against the door heavy enough to shake the walls. Dudley woke with a whimper. Petunia gave a stifled cry. Vernon seized the rifle he had brought for reasons that had seemed insane 3 hours earlier, and alarmingly sensible now. The knock came again. Not a knock, a blow. Then the door crashed inward in a burst of wind and spray, and a giant filled the threshold. He had shaggy hair and a beard black as wet bark, a moleskin overcoat straining over a body broad enough to block half the room, and in one enormous hand he carried a squashed box tied with string. His eyes, beetle bright under the tangle of hair, found Harry at once. "Couldn't make us a cup of tea, could ye?" It's not been an easy journey. No one moved. The giant ducked under the lintel and kicked the broken door shut behind him. Rain hissed down the chimney. Vernon raised the rifle with hands that shook despite all his bluster. "I demand that you leave this instant." The giant glanced at the gun as if it were a rude umbrella. "Oh, shut up, Dursley." He bent over Harry, and the whole hut seemed to shift from terror to something else entirely, something so unfamiliar that Harry did not at first recognize it as kindness. "Last time I saw you, you was only a baby," the giant said softly. "You look a lot like your dad, but yay, got your mum's eyes." He thrust the battered box at Harry. "Brought summat. Might have sat on it at some point, mine." Inside was a cake with green icing that read, "Happy Birthday, Harry." No one had ever baked him a cake. Harry looked up. "Who are you?" "Rubius Hagrid," the giant said, straightening with a creak of coat and leather. "Keeper o' keys and grounds at Hogwarts." His chest swelled a bit at that. "And you, Harry, are a wizard." Silence fell as completely as if the storm outside had stopped. Harry had imagined many answers to the mystery of himself, though never in so plain a form. Freak, perhaps. Something broken. Something wrong. Something contagious from a mother he could not remember and an aunt who would not speak of her. But wizard landed in him with the peculiar weight of truth already known in the body before the mind can catch up. "A what?" "A wizard," Hagrid repeated. "And a thumpin' good one, I'd say, once ye have been trained up a bit." Vernon found his voice first. "He will not be going. We swore we'd stamp it out." Hagrid turned, and for the first time Harry saw what it might look like for Uncle Vernon's bullying to meet a force too large to swallow. "Stamp out?" Hagrid rumbled. "You tried tear stamp out magic." Petunia flinched as though struck by the word. Harry looked from one adult face to another, and felt the room rearrange itself around revelation. "My parents," he said. "They were. A witch and wizard, both of them. Head and shoulders above the average. Killed by a dark wizard when you was a baby." Hagrid's great hand gentled awkwardly on Harry's shoulder. "Didn't die in no car crash." Harry's mind seemed to split open. Beneath all the years of mean answers and withheld truths, there had apparently been an entire hidden architecture to the world, and now it rose around him with terrifying speed. They were murdered? Hagrid's eyes softened. Harry stared at the cake box in his lap, because if he looked at anyone's face, he thought he might break apart. His throat hurt. "And things happen. They always have. I can make..." He swallowed. "Without anything. Without touching." Hagrid's brows climbed into the thicket of his hair. "Accidental magic, you mean? Kids do that before school. It isn't always accidental." That changed the air in the hut. Hagrid bent lower. "What do you mean?" So Harry told him, haltingly at first, then faster as the sheer relief of being asked overcame caution. The cupboard latch. The toy soldier. The roof. The glass at the zoo. He did not look at Vernon or Petunia while he spoke. He looked only at Hagrid, whose face moved from surprise to concern to something like wonder. "Well," Hagrid said when Harry finished. That's not usual, no?" Petunia made a low sound in her throat. Vindication and dread tangled together. "Can wizards do magic without those?" Harry pointed to the pink umbrella propped beside Hagrid's chair, for it was the nearest object he had that resembled a wand. "Without wands, some can. Advanced stuff, most often. Foreign schools do things different sometimes. But in Britain..." Hagrid hesitated, choosing honesty over comfort. "In Britain we use wands. Safer, easier, better for control." Harry thought of the stopped clock in the hall, of glass that had vanished because he could not bear it there. Safer sounded important. Hagrid reached into his coat and drew out the letter Vernon had failed, after all, to keep from him. The emerald ink glowed in the firelight. Harry took it with both hands. He did not sleep much before dawn. Too many truths pressed at him. His parents had names: James and Lily. The strange things he did belonged to a world larger than Privet Drive, a world with schools and rules, and perhaps answers. And somewhere inside that world, invisible as a current under dark water, there was the knowledge that he had already begun learning one of its rarer languages entirely alone. When morning came and Hagrid led him out beneath a sky scrubbed raw by storm, Harry did not once look back at the hut on the rock. The sea raged around them, but for the first time in his life, the sound in his ears was not confinement. It was approach. London altered for Harry by degrees, and then all at once. First there was the leaky cauldron, hidden in plain sight between an ordinary bookshop and an ordinary record store. A pub that had apparently existed all along while the world pretended not to see it. Hagrid walked him through the doorway, and the room fell still. Heads turned. Voices broke off. A witch dropped her tankard. A bald wizard with a purple top hat shook Harry's hand 3 separate times. Someone whispered, "It's him," and Harry, who had spent nearly 10 years trying not to be noticed at all, wanted very badly to vanish. Hagrid, unaware or unconcerned, beamed as though he had brought in a prince long thought lost. Harry tried not to stare, but everything demanded it. Men reading candles that hovered obediently over newspapers. Women whose robes changed shade like clouds. A laughing ghost drifting through a wall with all the casual arrogance of a rich man crossing a room he already owned. No one here looked at Harry the way Privet Drive had looked at him. There was curiosity, yes, and awe and pity in some faces, but not recoil. Not the pinched, exhausted disgust of people forced to house an unwanted thing. He found himself holding his shoulders differently without meaning to. "Come on," Hagrid said, ushering him back out into the alley beyond the brick wall. Loads Terdu. Diagon Alley unfolded like a story someone had hidden inside a street and forgotten to put away. Apothecary jars gleamed with eyes and claws and roots like twisted fingers. Broomsticks shone in windows. Owls rustled in shadowed cages. Cauldrons hung in tiers of brass and pewter. Robes spun lazily on enchanted mannequins. Wizards moved through it all with the absorbed purpose of market-goers in any age. Comparing, bargaining, gossiping. But to Harry the scene had the impossible brightness of a dream not yet dulled by waking. At Gringotts he felt it again, that other sense he had been building wordlessly for years. The bank itself seemed old enough to have opinions. Magic lay in the white stone like frost under skin. It ran along the rails of the carts and coiled in the vault doors. When the goblin touched a key to Harry's vault, wards stirred in the depths below, immense and cold and highly disinclined to make anyone welcome. Hagrid watched Harry's face while the door rolled back. "You all right?" "It's loud," Harry said before he could stop himself. Hagrid blinked. Loud? Harry had no better explanation. Not loud in the ear. Loud the way a crowd could be loud before one heard its speech. Never mind. Gold shone from the vault in stacked heaps, and whatever else Harry felt vanished under the simple astonishment of it. This, then, was what it meant to have belonged all along to a world that had not told him so. This, too, his parents had left him. He would remember Hagrid pocketing the small grimy parcel from Vault 713 only later, after too much had happened. At the time he was overwhelmed merely by the fact that a key with his name on it existed at all. They bought books, robes, a cauldron, scales, telescope. Harry chose a snowy owl with grave amber eyes, because she looked at everyone else as though measuring them and finding them unworthy. He held her cage all through the alley and felt, for the first time, what it might be like to be responsible for something other than keeping his own head down. In the bookshop, while Hagrid argued cheerfully with a display of flesh-eating slugs, Harry found a slim volume called Magical Theory shoved crookedly between weightier texts. He opened it at random and saw, halfway down a page, a paragraph explaining that the wand was a focusing instrument, not the source of power itself, that some magical traditions in Africa and Asia emphasized direct casting, that European wand use had grown dominant not because it was the only way, but because it was reliable, teachable, repeatable. Harry read the lines twice, pulse quickening. Not the only way. He bought the book with his own money before Hagrid could see the title and object that it looked too advanced. The words sat warm in the back of his mind for the rest of the afternoon. They saved Ollivanders for last. The shop was narrow, dim, and quiet as a church after service. Long boxes climbed the walls to a ceiling lost in shadows. A bell tinkled somewhere in the depths and set a hush into motion. A man emerged from the dark as if the shelves had assembled him from dust. He was pale, silver-eyed, and so light on his feet that Harry thought absurdly of a spider stepping across water. "Good afternoon," he said. "You have your mother's eyes." Harry had begun to understand that this was something people would keep saying to him. It still struck him each time like a hand on the heart. The man introduced himself as Garrick Ollivander and proceeded to measure Harry in a manner so brisk and uncanny that Harry hardly had time to feel ridiculous. Tape wrapped his arm, his shoulder, the space between his nostrils. Wands began arriving by themselves from the shelves overhead, dropping neatly into Ollivander's, waiting fingers as if eager for judgment. Harry tried one. Nothing. Another. A shower of red sparks that singed the curtains. A third that turned the entire front window opaque with frost. "Curious," Ollivander murmured, not sounding dismayed so much as interested at a depth likely unhealthy in any sane person. "Very curious indeed." Harry tightened his grip on the latest wand. He could feel his own magic recoiling from some and flaring toward others like a dog pulling on a lead. "What is?" he asked. Ollivander's silver eyes flicked to his face. "Most young witches and wizards arrive at my shop full of promise and chaos in roughly equal quantity. Their magic is untrained, certainly, but one feels the shape of its future through the wand. Yours." He took the wand back and slid it away. "Yours appears to have grown habits." Harry stood very still. Ollivander turned and drew down a long, narrow box from a high shelf. The moment his fingers touched it, Harry felt something answer in the base of his spine. A sharp golden pull as unmistakable as being recognized by name in a crowd. "Let us try this." The wand within was holly, smooth and pale. 11 inches. Phoenix feather core. The second Harry wrapped his hand around it. Warmth flashed through him. Not a surge, not an explosion, but a profound settling, as if a voice that had spoken too near his ear for years had at last stepped back to a distance where it could be understood. Red gold light spilled from the tip. The dust in the shop whirled. Hundreds of boxes shivered softly against the shelves, like birds adjusting themselves on a wire. Harry lifted the wand instinctively. The room held its breath. Then the light softened and withdrew, leaving only his own astonishment standing in its wake. Ollivander smiled, and the expression transformed him from eerie to exultant. Harry could not stop looking at the wand. "It feels..." "Yes." "Quieter." Ollivander's brows rose very slightly, as though that were exactly the answer he had hoped for and had not expected to hear. "Indeed. A wand channels. It civilizes force. It persuades magic to speak in grammar rather than weather." Harry thought of the cupboard latch lifting in the dark, of clocks halting under emotion, of the raw pressure that had made glass vanish at the zoo. "Can I still, if I don't use it, do things without it?" Ollivander finished. "I imagine so. That talent, once established, rarely disappears. But I would advise caution." He placed Harry's wand back in his hand with unusual gentleness. "Wandless magic asks much of the self. A wand allows distance, form, precision. It is not a crutch. It is a covenant." Harry scarcely had time to puzzle over that before Ollivander added, almost idly, "Curious that you should be destined for this wand. The phoenix feather in its core has but one brother, you see. The brother gave another wand to the wizard who left you that scar." Yeah. The shop seemed to contract around the words. Harry's fingers went numb on the holly. "The man who killed my parents?" Ollivander regarded him with those unsettling silver eyes, and did not soften the truth. "The very same." Outside, Diagon Alley rang with commerce and laughter. Inside the shop, Harry felt the old world tilt again beneath his feet. The wand in his hand did not become hateful. If anything, it became heavier with meaning. It belonged to him, and yet it carried within it an echo of the darkest thing he had ever heard about himself. He paid for it with coins that clinked too loudly in the hush. On the way back through the alley, Hagrid talked at length about school lists, schoolhouses, school rules, but Harry heard only scraps. He kept sliding the wand from its paper wrapping and laying it across his palm, testing the new sensation of containment. The magic in him still moved. It always would. Yet now its edges seemed findable. At King's Cross Station weeks later, when the Scarlet steam engine waited beyond the barrier and Molly Weasley's cheerful competence had somehow solved the impossible business of Platform 9 3/4, Harry stood with his trunk and owl and wand, and understood that his life had split cleanly in two. Behind him lay Privet Drive, where power had been a shameful thing done in secret to avoid pain. Ahead lay Hogwarts, where power had rules and names and history and perhaps a future that belonged to him. When the train began to move and London slid away beyond the window, Harry put one hand over the pocket where his wand rested and felt, for the first time, that the world was not merely happening to him. It was opening. The first person on the Hogwarts Express who looked at Harry and did not seem impressed, frightened, or reverent was Ronald Weasley, and Harry liked him immediately for it. Ron arrived in their compartment red-haired, lanky, and slightly out of breath, dragging a trunk that appeared to contain half a household. He paused only long enough to ask whether the seat was taken, and then sat with the graceless relief of a boy, accustomed to having to compete for every inch of space at home. When Harry offered him chocolate frogs and Bertie Bott's every flavor beans from the trolley, Ron stared, not at Harry, but at the spread of sweets in simple wonder. "You've got loads," he said. Harry, who had never had enough of anything to feel casual about abundance, gave him more than he could possibly eat. They fell into talk the way boys do when they are both lonely enough to be grateful. Ron spoke of older brothers with a mixture of devotion and grievance. Harry listened and learned the names of people who might one day become important to him long before he knew why. In return, he offered scraps of Privet Drive and discovered that when given beside Ron's matter-of-fact sympathy, those scraps sounded less like evidence of personal defect and more like proof that his relatives were dreadful. Hermione Granger appeared before luncheon in a cloud of authority. She had already changed into school robes and wore the expression of someone determined to arrive at greatness by preparation, if not by natural benevolence. "Has anyone seen a toad?" she asked. Then, without waiting for a proper answer, she noticed Ron attempting a spell on his rat and corrected his pronunciation with ruthless briskness. Harry might have found her insufferable if she had not. In the same breath turned to him and said, "You're Harry Potter, aren't you? I've read about you, of course." Of course. Harry was beginning to understand that the story of him had lived a very busy life without his participation. Hermione stayed only a minute or two. It was long enough to see the packet of Drubel's gum on Harry's knee lift slightly before he reached for it, and settle again. Her eyes narrowed. "Did you do that?" Harry followed her gaze and felt heat rise behind his ears. "Do what?" "That." She pointed, then seemed to think better of it. "Never mind." Draco Malfoy came later, pale and smooth-haired in new black robes that managed somehow to look more expensive than anyone else's. He had met Harry briefly in Madame Malkin's, and already assumed the intimacy of superior boys, certain they are conferring honor by preference. He glanced at Ron's patched sleeves, at the sweets spread between them, and curled his lip. "You'll find some wizarding families are better than others, Potter." Harry, who knew more than Draco could imagine about the uses of humiliation, disliked him on the spot. By the time the castle rose out of the dusk above the lake, turrets black against a violet sky, Harry's nerves had returned with a violence that made the whole train seem too small for him. The wand in his pocket pulsed once, lightly, as though in answer. The Sorting Hat sat on its stool beneath the enchanted ceiling and sang a song about houses and virtues that Harry barely heard. The great hall was too full of marvels, floating candles, Silver plates, ghosts drifting through the air with the bored entitlement of old nobility. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him as he stepped forward when his name was called. He sat. The hat came down over his ears. "Ah," it said almost at once, and the voice in his head sounded older than the stones around him. Interesting. Harry gripped the stool. Quiet power. Strange habits. Fear. Taught early. Control before teaching. Very unusual indeed. Harry did not know one answered in this situation, but his whole being seemed caught in the hat's probing. "Not Slytherin," the voice mused. "No. Too much resistance to cruelty. Too much hunger for belonging. You would do well where courage is expected of you, though I suspect you will redefine the shape of the thing." Not Slytherin, Harry thought desperately, without knowing entirely why. The hat laughed inside his skull. "Gryffindor." The hall exploded in applause. Harry removed the hat on unsteady hands and made his way to the table where Ron was cheering hard enough to shake the bench. The relief that washed through him at finding one friendly face in the blaze of attention was almost enough to make him laugh. Almost. Minerva McGonagall noticed him on the second day of lessons. Transfiguration suited Harry in a way that made him uneasy. It was not that he excelled at once. No first year could truly excel at turning matches into needles under the stern gaze of McGonagall. But the principles beneath the spellwork felt uncannily familiar. Intention. Shape. The difference between wanting and directing. On his third attempt, before he had completed the wand movement properly, the match quivered and silvered at one end. McGonagall's sharp eyes snapped to him. "Again, Mr. Potter." More slowly. Harry obeyed. This time he forced himself to wait, to build the incantation with wand and will together, rather than letting the older instinct leap ahead. The match transformed cleanly into a needle. "Good," McGonagall said. But after class, she detained him. Her office smelled of parchment and polished wood. Harry stood before her desk with the familiar tightness in his stomach that school authority always inspired. McGonagall, however, looked less angry than thoughtful. "Mr. Potter," she said, steepling her fingers, "have you received any unusual instruction before arriving at Hogwarts?" Harry considered lying, saw no point, and settled for caution. "No, Professor." She studied him a moment longer. "Whatever instincts you may have developed, you will use your wand, your words, and the discipline of the class. Magic performed ahead of form tends to become sloppy. Sloppy magic is dangerous." "Nani? And God me." "Come. Yes, Professor." Her gaze softened by a degree only someone looking for mercy would notice. "Talent is not a license for improvisation." Harry nodded, though a part of him bristled at being told that the only skill that had ever kept him safe was something to be suspected. Charms was worse. Professor Flitwick was so delighted by any spark of success that the room itself seemed to bounce with him, which did not help Harry's concentration. They were levitating feathers. Hermione naturally did at first and wore the sort of modest satisfaction that managed to be more aggravating than open pride. Ron's feathers smoldered. Neville's flew sideways into Seamus Inkpot. Harry, determined to do exactly as McGonagall had said, fixed his gaze on the feather, pronounced the charm, and moved his wand. The feather rose before the movement finished. Only an inch. Only long enough for it to hang between certainty and gravity. Then his wand completed the arc and the feather bobbed properly into the air. Ron whooped. Flitwick clapped. Hermione stared at Harry with the expression of a girl encountering a theorem that had solved itself while she was still laying out the proof. "You did that before you said it," she whispered after class. "I didn't." "You did." Harry shoved his books into his bag. "Maybe I was just fast." Hermione looked deeply dissatisfied with this explanation and therefore certain to investigate it further. Severus Snape noticed Harry in a different way. The dungeon classroom under his domain made everyone feel already guilty. Harry had never seen a man who resembled his own clothes so exactly. Snape's black robes seemed not worn but exuded, part of a continuous shadow shaped temporarily like a person. When he called Harry out on the first day of potions, asking impossible questions about bezoars and monkshood with a silken contempt that made the class shrink in their seats. Harry's humiliation flashed hot enough to light the torches brighter. Literally, every flame in the room surged at once. Not high, not alarmingly, but enough. The class gasped. Snape stopped in the middle of a sentence. His dark eyes cut across the room and fixed on Harry's face with the force of a knife finding bone. Harry forced himself into stillness. The flames settled. A long pause followed. "Fame," Snape said at last, more softly than before, "is clearly not your only talent." Laughter skittered nervously around the dungeon. Harry wanted the floor to open. Instead, he lowered his head over his cauldron and spent the remainder of the lesson swallowing his temper so steadily that his potion turned out perfect. Flying was the first thing that felt simple. When Madame Hooke barked for them to call their brooms, the sticks rolled and hopped uncertainly into several hands. Harry said, "Up," and his broom slapped into his palm at once, as if it had been waiting there all along. He saw Draco notice. He saw Hermione notice too, from the concerned tightness around her mouth. Harry might have felt pleased if he had not already understood that every effortless thing he did carried a price and scrutiny. The Remembrall incident happened fast. Neville's fall. Draco's theft. The red glass ball flashing through cold air. Harry on the broom before anyone had properly told him not to be. The rush of wind. The great, fierce joy of the world falling away beneath him and revealing itself, at last, as something that could be met on equal terms. He dived because diving made sense. Because balance and intention and movement had always understood each other better than people did. He caught the Remembrall in a hand that shook only after the fact. When McGonagall swept him away instead of expelling him, Harry was too startled to speak. Oliver Wood, broad-faced and intent, looked him over in the empty classroom where McGonagall had delivered him like a prize falcon. "He caught it one-handed?" "He did," McGonagall said dryly. Wood grinned. "Brilliant." Thus Harry became Gryffindor's youngest seeker in a century, and by the same motion the subject of a new species of rumor. It moved through corridors faster than owls. Potter's broom obeyed before he touched it. Potter's spell started before he spoke. Potter's temper made candles flare. Potter didn't need a wand at all. That last one was nonsense, and Harry knew it. The wand mattered. It steadied him. It made the difference between reaching and grasping. But nonsense has never stopped people from admiring, fearing, or envying what they do not understand. By October, Harry could feel the castle watching him back. Not literally, perhaps. Yet Hogwarts was older than anything he had ever inhabited, and there were moments in its stairwells and moonlit corridors when the stones seemed to listen. Magic saturated the place. Not the furtive, stifled pressure he had known at Privet Drive, but vast, layered, civil power shaped over centuries by rule and repetition. Against that background, Harry's own gift felt less monstrous and more unfinished. He found that realization comforting. He also found, to his growing annoyance, that Hermione Granger had started keeping track of the unfinished parts. Whenever an object shifted too soon in his direction, whenever a quill rolled across the desk before he had reached for it, her eyebrows would rise. Ron, after some initial disbelief, accepted the matter with the practical generosity of boys who have 7 siblings and no room left for astonishment. Hermione wanted explanations. Ron only wanted to know whether Harry could make Fred and George's sweets walk out of their pockets at dinner. "No," Harry said. "Can you try?" The answer, regrettably, was yes. Quidditch should have been the one part of Hogwarts untouched by complication. On a broom, Harry's mind ceased its endless listening. The world became air and speed, and the narrow, bright logic of pursuit. He had no need to think about what his magic was doing, because in the air it stopped feeling separate from him. It became instinct shaped by purpose, and purpose had always been easier than peace. Oliver Wood taught strategy with missionary fervor. Alicia, Katie, and Angelina taught him how not to get flattened by bludgers. Fred and George taught him with cheerful lack of conscience how to tell when a crowd wanted blood as opposed to spectacle. By November, Harry could feel the motions of a match unfolding like weather patterns in his bones, which was why the jinx hit him so strangely. One moment he was scanning the pitch for the snitch, ears full of wind and roaring stands. The next, his broom jerked so hard beneath him that his teeth clacked together. He pitched sideways. The stand smeared into a mass of color below. Harry tightened both hands around the handle and felt something alien worrying at the wood. Not wind. Not imbalance. Intent. A hostile, needling pressure, digging and twisting as if invisible fingers sought purchase inside the broom's obedience. Panic. Panic was useless. Panic burst things. He forced breath into his lungs and reached not for a spell but for the sensation he had first known in a cupboard under the stairs. The simple fact that an object could be persuaded toward the shape he needed. Stay, he thought, not as command but as bond. Stay with me. The broom bucked again, nearly flinging him clear. Yet some small part of it answered. He felt the wood under his palms shudder, then cling to his grip like a frightened animal deciding not to bolt. Below, the crowd noise changed timbre. Shouting sharpened into screams. Harry risked a glance toward the teacher's stand. Snape sat there, lips moving, eyes fixed on him with a concentration so intense it looked murderous. Beside him, Quirrell hunched oddly still. Harry had no room in him for interpretation. He only knew danger and direction. Another convulsion slammed through the broom, worse than before. Harry slipped, one leg hooking by instinct. The pitch yawned beneath him. Then the pressure broke. Not gradually. It snapped away so fast he almost overcorrected and shot straight upward. He hauled himself back into the seat, gasping. Below, Hermione was nowhere to be seen. Ron was on his feet. Snape had half risen, robes in disarray, looking furiously over one shoulder as if someone had just crashed into him. Harry did not understand any of it. He only knew the broom was his again. And then the snitch flashed near the ground like a drop of molten gold, and instinct took over. He dived. The whole stadium held its breath. Mud and grass rushed toward him. He stretched, felt metal and wings strike his mouth, and tumbled into the earth with the snitch clenched between his teeth. The roar that followed shook the November sky. Later, in the changing rooms, Wood bellowed that he was a marvel. The twins clapped him hard enough to bruise, and Angelina called him a maniac with unmistakable affection. Harry laughed because everyone else was laughing, but under the noise a cold line remained. Someone had tried to throw him from his broom in front of the entire school. Snape, he thought. The image of that fixed dark stare had branded itself in him. Hermione disagreed. It might have been, she said. Pace clipped with excitement as the three of them hurried toward the library that afternoon. But something interrupted it. I went to the stands. Snape was muttering. Yes, but so was Quirrell. Ron looked scandalized. Quirrell? He can barely teach. Hermione's mouth tightened. Magic ability and confidence are not the same thing. Harry remembered Quirrell's watery nervousness, the garlic smell around his turban, the way he stammered through lectures as though language itself were a dangerous animal. The idea sat poorly in his mind. Yet then, so did the thought of Snape trying to save him. Maybe they were both doing something, Harry said. Neither Ron nor Hermione had an answer to that. The troll came on Halloween and rearranged everything. Harry had spent much of the afternoon feeling raw from a thoughtless remark Ron had made about Hermione's know-it-all manner, because he had seen the way her face closed and recognized in it the precise, humiliating pain of pretending not to care. He had found her difficult often enough. He had also found in her relentless certainty a strange kind of loyalty. She believed there must be correct answers, and therefore problems could be solved. It troubled him more than he expected that she had missed the feast. When Professor Quirrell burst in shouting about a troll in the dungeons, panic spread faster than smoke. Prefects herded students in clumps. Teachers shouted instructions. Ron went white. Hermione doesn't know. They looked at each other and ran. The girls' bathroom smelled of soap, damp stone, and the rank animal stench of the troll long before they reached the doorway. Hermione stood frozen by the sinks. her wand half drawn, while the mountain troll lumbered toward her with its club dragging furrows in the floor. Harry did not think in full sentences after that. He shouted. The troll turned. Ron hurled a metal tap. It bounced harmlessly off the creature's shoulder. Harry snatched up the nearest thing, a splintered stall door, and flung himself forward, not because he believed he could hurt the troll, but because motion was better than watching. The club swept through the air. Harry dropped beneath it and felt the wind of its passage. He landed against the troll's vast back, clinging like a burr while the creature bellowed and spun. Hermione screamed. Ron shouted a spell that went wrong and showered tiles across the floor. The troll reared, reaching clumsily for Harry behind its own head. And Harry, staring at the club in its fist, knew with that ruthless, bright clarity that came only in danger, that if it came down once more, Hermione would die. Not there, he thought. The club jerked sideways. Only a little. Only enough to unbalance the troll's wrist. Yet the change created a gap in its grip, and in that gap Ron's second attempt at Wingardium Leviosa found its mark. The club shot upward, hung an instant, and came crashing down on the troll's skull. The giant collapsed like a felled tree. For several seconds no one moved. Water dripped somewhere. Hermione's breath came ragged and quick. Ron's wand hand trembled so violently he had to catch his wrist with the other. Then Harry slid off the troll's back and stood in the wreckage with his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Hermione looked at him. Not at the troll. Not at the shattered sinks. At him. You moved it, she said. Ron let out a half-hysterical laugh. He did, didn't he? Harry wanted to deny it. He wanted, with sudden fierce longing, to be ordinary in the aftermath of heroism. But something in Hermione's face stopped him. There was fear there, yes, but not of him. Fear for him, perhaps. Fear of what it meant. And alongside it, to his astonishment, trust. A bit, he admitted. Professor McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell burst in moments later to find 3 first years, 1 unconscious troll, and enough shattered porcelain to justify an inquiry. Hermione lied for them magnificently, claiming she had gone after the troll herself, and the boys had merely followed to save her. Harry had never before seen someone use rule-breaking as an act of grace. He loved her a little for it on the spot. After that, there was no question of their being anything but friends. Friendship, Harry discovered, altered the whole geometry of the castle. Corridors narrowed when shared with Ron's running commentary or Hermione's analysis. Evenings by the fire expanded. Fear divided itself into thirds and became manageable. Secrets, however, grew sharper. Fluffy came first, the 3-headed dog behind the forbidden door. Discovered during the midnight duel fiasco Draco had engineered and Harry had been fool enough to accept. Then Snape's wounded leg. Then Hagrid's slip about what the beast was guarding. Then the name Nicholas Flamel, which none of them recognized, and all of them became determined to uncover. Suspicion attached itself to Snape because suspicion needed a face, and Snape's face was so eminently suitable for villainy. Yet Harry could not entirely forget the pitch, the 2 currents of magic he had felt there, one tearing, one binding. Nor could he forget Quirrell's collapse after the match, pale and shaken as though he too had been fighting some unseen force. By November's end, Harry knew 3 things with confidence. Someone wanted whatever was hidden beneath Fluffy. The teachers believed it important enough to guard with monstrous teeth and magic. And his own strange gift had become impossible to keep wholly private. He lay awake long after Ron's snores had filled the dormitory and stared up at the canopy of his bed. A friend changes what fear can do to a boy. It no longer teaches only secrecy. Sometimes, far more dangerously, it teaches loyalty. Winter entered Hogwarts with an authority the castle seemed to enjoy. The corridors sharpened. The lake darkened to hammered iron. Breath hung in the air after morning lessons. At Privet Drive, cold had always meant drafts and damp socks, and Vernon complaining about the gas bill. At Hogwarts, it meant stone turning austere and beautiful under frost. Fireplaces becoming centers of allegiance, the promise of Christmas swelling quietly in the walls. It also meant the library became their battleground. Nicholas Flamel refused to reveal himself to them. He was not in great wizarding events of the 20th century, nor in notable magical names of our time, nor in the several historical compendiums Hermione marched through alphabetically with increasingly murderous determination. Harry, when his patience failed, found himself unconsciously drawing books off shelves that looked promising. Hermione noticed this and made an outraged sound the first time a volume slid into his hands from 3 feet away. That is not a search method. It worked. That is not the point. Ron, sprawled among stacks with a jam tart in hand, said, "Seems like exactly the point." The answer came, as so many answers did around Hagrid, by accident. A card in a chocolate frog packet. A remembered sentence. Hermione's triumphant gasp. Nicholas Flamel, alchemist, creator of the Philosopher's Stone. Immortality. Gold. Doom. They stared at one another over the card and felt the puzzle lock into place. A stone that makes gold, Ron breathed. No wonder someone wants it. And elixir of life, Hermione said. It can keep a person alive forever. Harry thought then, not of wealth or immortality, but of Quirrell's frightened stammer and Snape's unreadable eyes. He thought of the hostile force on his broom. He thought, suddenly and inexplicably, of a presence hungry enough to strip all gentleness from the world around it. Christmas arrived before he could name why. For the first time in his life, Harry woke to presents. Real ones. A hand-knitted jumper for Mrs. Weasley in a rich bottle green that made his throat ache with gratitude. Sweets from Hermione with a note listing which were safest. A package from Hagrid containing a carved wooden flute rough with good intentions, and folded in silver cloth beneath the others, an old invisibility cloak with a note that said only that it had once belonged to his father. Harry touched the fabric and felt it hum faintly under his fingers, older and finer than any enchantment he had yet encountered. Some magic did not flare. Some simply endured. The cloak made mischief possible. It also made solitude possible, which mattered more. On the night he found the mirror, Harry had not intended discovery. He had meant only to stretch his legs after curfew, and perhaps investigate the restricted Section 1 corridor farther than Hermione would approve. Peeves forced a detour. Filch nearly cornered him. Harry slipped through a doorway into an unused classroom and stopped. The mirror stood taller than the room deserved, its gilded frame carved with strange runes and clawed feet, gripping the floorboards like talons. Moonlight from the windows crossed its surface in pale bars. Harry, breathing hard beneath the cloak, stepped closer. He saw himself. That was expected. He saw behind himself a crowd. He whipped round. The room was empty. In the glass they remained. A woman with vivid green eyes and dark red hair shining like banked flame. A man untidy and handsome with spectacles slightly askew. More faces beyond them, generations perhaps, gathered close and smiling with the unbearable intimacy of recognition. The woman placed her hands on Harry's shoulders. The man's hand rested over Harry's heart. Harry's breath left him. His own face in the mirror was transformed by joy so fierce it looked almost like pain. He lifted his hand. The woman lifted hers. Their fingers did not meet. For a long time, minutes, hours, he could not have said. Harry stood before the glass while everything in him reached. Not with a controllable tug he used on marbles and books and latches. This was not persuasion. It was longing in its oldest form, the body moving toward what it has been shaped to need. He wanted their voices. He wanted the smell of them, the weight of their hands, the chance to ask foolish, impossible questions about bedtime and birthdays, and whether his mother had ever made the world listen when she was angry too. The mirror gave him none of it. It gave only vision. When at last he stumbled back to the dormitory, dawn was thinning the windows. He returned the next night, and the next. The mirror changed nothing. His parents always stood just beyond his reach. Once he whispered, with all the old skill he possessed, "Please." Nothing in the glass answered him. That frightened him more than he cared to admit. His magic could touch wood, glass, metal, wind. It could lean on objects and sometimes on chance. But here was an enchantment built not to obey desire but to reveal it. And before it, Harry's peculiar talent meant nothing at all. On the fourth night, Dumbledore was waiting. Harry saw him only after tearing off the cloak in shock and shame. The headmaster sat on one of the classroom desks as calmly as if midnight were an appointment they had both kept precisely. The candle he held lit his lined face from below, drawing gold out of his beard and deep thought out of his eyes. "So," Dumbledore said, "here you are." Harry had been afraid of many adults in many ways. Dumbledore inspired something different. Not because he was gentle, though he often was, but because one sensed at once that gentleness in him was a decision, not a limit. Harry looked at the mirror, then back at the old man. "What is it?" "It shows us neither truth nor lies," Dumbledore said. "Only the shape of our deepest desire." Harry glanced helplessly at the glass where his parents still stood, patient and radiant. "I see them." "Yes." Dumbledore's voice held no surprise, only a sadness so tempered by acceptance that it felt like warmth. Harry swallowed. "I thought," he said, and stopped. Dumbledore waited. "I thought maybe I could—" Harry looked down at his hands. "Make something happen. Because things often do when you wish hard enough." Harry's head came up sharply. Dumbledore's gaze remained kind and implacable. "Mrs. Figg, then? Or perhaps McGonagall? Or perhaps Dumbledore simply missed less than other people." Harry felt suddenly transparent. "It doesn't always work," he muttered. "No," Dumbledore agreed. "And it is well that it does not. Desire is a terrible architect when left to build the world alone." Harry looked back at the mirror. His reflected mother smiled with an ache that split him open. "Did you know my mother?" "I did." "Was she—" Harry faltered. "Like me?" Dumbledore considered. "Lily had an excellent gift for charms. She was bright, warm, and very brave. As for being like you, every child resembles a parent in some way, though resemblance is not destiny." Harry absorbed that slowly. "I can do things without a wand." "Yes." The word fell into the room without adornment. Harry's face burned. "Does everyone know?" "Not everyone. A few observant people. Fewer understand what it means." Dumbledore rose and came to stand beside him before the glass. "Britain is very fond of doing magic in a proper orderly fashion. Wands, incantations, ministry pamphlets. They are useful habits, but magic is older than our habits. Sometimes, in children who have survived too much too early, it becomes attentive." Harry thought of cupboard latches and stopped clocks in a trolls club, veering aside. "Am I strange?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled, but the answer itself was solemn. "Unusual, certainly. Strange? That depends on whether one considers roses strange for growing where nettles were planted." "No." Harry did not smile. The mirror made it difficult. Dumbledore's expression gentled further. "Power that answers the heart quickly must be taught patience, Harry. Otherwise grief will teach it hunger, and anger will teach it cruelty. This mirror is dangerous not because it lies, but because it invites us to remain where wanting is easier than living." He placed a hand, light as paper, on Harry's shoulder. "You must not come here again." Harry nodded, though every ragged part of him rebelled. Dumbledore covered the mirror with a sweep of dark cloth. The classroom seemed to exhale when the reflections vanished. The weeks that followed should have been ordinary, and were not. Hagrid won a dragon egg from a hooded stranger and proved alarmingly susceptible to flattery. Norbert hatched in a burst of smoke and teeth and promptly became the center of a crisis involving scorched blankets, illegal dragon keeping, and Hagrid's utter inability to see fault in any creature that might potentially maim him. Harry liked the dragon at once. It possessed the clean honesty of dangerous things. When Norbert snapped at his fingers, Harry found he could calm the hatchling by resting a hand near its snout and breathing steadily until the tiny furnace inside it eased. "See?" Hagrid said proudly. "Likes ya." "It likes not being shouted at," Hermione said, but there was reluctant affection in her voice. The smuggling plan to Charlie Weasley's friends went well until it didn't. Malfoy meddled. McGonagall caught them out of bed. 50 points each vanished from Gryffindor like blood draining from a body. What followed might have been harder for Harry than any cupboard. For the first time since arriving at Hogwarts, he became not merely famous, but blamed. Older Gryffindors muttered when he sat near them. Strangers glared in corridors. Their House Cup prospects, once bright, were in tatters because 3 first years and Neville Longbottom had been idiots in the night. Harry had borne contempt before. What he had not borne was the knowledge that he had cost people who had been kind to him. Ron tried to joke through it. Hermione worked like fury. Harry walked through the castle feeling the weight of every turned shoulder. If the mirror had taught him what he desired, this taught him what he feared. Not punishment, not pain, but becoming again the thing no one wanted in the room. Detention took them into the forbidden forest under a moon so bright it silvered the edges of every leaf and made the darkness between trunks seem all the more deliberate. Hagrid carried a crossbow and a lantern and moved through the trees with the caution of a man who loved the place without imagining for a second that it loved him back. Fang the boarhound pressed so close to his legs that his bulk became comic. Draco, assigned to the same punishment through a neat alignment of justice and irony, attempted superiority for the first quarter mile and abandoned it the moment something screamed far away among the pines. They were hunting whatever had been killing unicorns. Harry felt the knowledge of that like ice under the skin. Unicorns belonged to picture books and moral categories, to all the childhood stories from which Privet Drive had barred him by sheer meanness. To injure one seemed not merely cruel, but cosmically improper. They found the first sign in a clearing. Silver blood splashed across dead leaves, luminous even in moonlight. Hermione drew breath sharply. Ron swore under his breath. Hagrid crouched and touched the edge of the spill, his great face shadowed with anger. "Split up," he said reluctantly. "Only short ways. We'll cover more ground." Every instinct Harry possessed recoiled from the instruction. Splitting up in strange woods at night in pursuit of a unicorn killer sounded like the sort of behavior one read about just before a body was found. Yet Hagrid knew the forest, and disobedience would waste time. Harry ended up with Draco and Fang while Hagrid took Hermione and Ron another direction. Draco was brave only in classrooms. "This is ridiculous," he hissed as they pushed through undergrowth. "Who'd want to hurt a unicorn?" Someone desperate, Harry thought. Though he did not know why the answer came with such certainty. The forest was not silent. Nothing truly living ever is. It creaked, whispered, rustled. Yet beneath the ordinary animal noises, Harry sensed a pressure that set his scar prickling. The sensation did not come from everywhere. It drew him forward, through nettles and under a low bough, into a glade where moonlight pooled white around a fallen shape. The unicorn lay on its side like spilled starlight. Something hooded knelt over it, drinking from the wound in its flank. Harry stopped dead. The figure lifted its head. Pain lanced through Harry's scar with such violence that the forest tilted. He staggered, clutching his forehead. Beside him, Draco made a noise like a trapped rabbit and bolted. Fang fled after him without even the pretense of canine loyalty. The hooded thing rose. Harry could not have moved if the world had cracked open. The pain nailed him where he stood. Yet through it, through the white flare behind his eyes, he felt something horribly familiar in the creature's presence. Hunger vast enough to deform the air around it. Not anger. Not ambition. Need. Need so complete that it had become identity. The figure glided toward him. Hooves thundered. A pale body shot between them with impossible speed, rearing against the dark. The hooded thing shrank back and vanished among the trees. Harry dropped to his knees, gasping. Above him, a centaur with hair like pale gold lowered forelegs to earth. "You are the Potter boy," the centaur said. Harry could only nod. The centaur's eyes held not sympathy but a sorrow so old it had worn almost smooth. "The forest has shown you something no child should see." When Hagrid and the others found them, the centaur, Firenze, had already withdrawn into the trees, and Harry's explanation tumbled out in broken fragments. Hagrid believed him at once. Hermione believed him with the fierce focus she gave all terrifying facts. Ron, after one horrified look at Harry's face, believed him because Harry's pain was real. Draco denied everything, which merely confirmed it. Back in the castle, with the towers black against dawn, Harry lay awake and understood at last what had been building beneath the year. The thing in the forest was connected to the thing on his broom, to the stone, to the ancient fear that seemed to flicker at the edge of Quirrell's stammer and the teacher's vigilance. It wanted life badly enough to drink innocence from the throat. A few days later, Hagrid let slip, under pressure and with appalling innocence, that the stranger who had given him Norbert's egg had asked how to get past Fluffy. "Just play him a bit of music," Hagrid said, and went white at their expressions. "It was Quirrell," Hermione whispered the moment they were out of earshot. "It has to have been." Harry thought of the hooded figure in the forest and felt certainty harden like cooling metal. Whether Quirrell served it willingly or not scarcely mattered. The stone was in danger now. That evening, after a suspiciously absent-minded Quirrell failed to appear at the leaving feast, and Snape vanished from the high table as well, Harry felt the old pressure of approach. Not letters against the walls this time. Intent moving through the castle. "He's going tonight," Harry said. There was no discussion after that, only decision. The trapdoor lay beneath Fluffy's sleeping bulk. Hagrid's flute worked exactly as advertised, which was both useful and infuriating. Once through, they dropped into darkness and landed in a mass of cold living coils. "Devil's snare!" Hermione choked. The plant tightened around Harry's ribs. Panic clawed at him. For one wild second he felt his Wandless magic surge, eager to burst outward and rip free. McGonagall's warning rang through him. Sloppy magic is dangerous. Harry forced himself still. Plants, he thought with sudden desperate clarity, liked certainty. They liked quiet. He let his body go limp even as the tendrils pressed. The coils around him loosened by a fraction. Beside him, Hermione remembered fire and conjured it in blue snaps that sent the plant recoiling. They fell into the next chamber, coughing and covered in green stains. The keys room followed, wings flashing in all directions under a vaulted ceiling. Harry mounted the broom without speaking. Some problems, at least, knew him. The correct key jerked away from the swarm as though it recognized pursuit. Harry dived, hand outstretched, and closed his fingers around cold metal just before it could slice upward beyond reach. Wizard's chess cost Ron. Harry wanted to argue. Hermione wanted to reason. Ron, white-faced and shaking but grimly certain, merely looked at them and said, "That's the point, isn't it? Someone has to be taken." "Nah." The Queen struck him down with stone finality. Harry had no choice but to trust and go on. A full-grown troll lay unconscious in the next chamber, already dealt with. That chilled Harry more than if it had been standing, because it meant Quirrell was ahead and moving quickly. Beyond it waited Snape's potion logic. 7 bottles, black flames, purple flames, and a riddle only Hermione could solve. She solved it. Of course she solved it. Her hands trembled only once as she set aside the smallest bottle. "This one gets one person through the black fire," she said. "And there's only enough to go one way. Harry." He knew before she said it. He would go alone. "No," Ron muttered thickly from where he lay half-conscious against the wall. "You can't." "I can," Harry said, though whether he meant can or must he did not know. Hermione's eyes were bright with fear she was trying very hard not to show. "You don't have to win," she said. "You just have to stop him long enough." Harry wanted to tell her that Quirrell, or whatever stood behind him, had already moved beyond the point where delay was simple. Instead, he took the bottle, swallowed the ice-cold potion, and turned toward the black flames. Then, because some truths become unbearable if left unsaid, he looked back. At Ron, sprawled and brave despite pain. At Hermione, pale and furious and brilliant. The 2 first true friends of his life. "If I'm not back, you will be," Hermione snapped, the ferocity in her voice almost enough to make him laugh. Harry stepped through the fire. Cold took him first. Then, Silence. Then the high, polished chamber beyond, where the mirror of Erised stood waiting like a memory-made trap. And beside it, not Snape but Quirrell, smiling with none of his classroom weakness left. For one impossible second, Harry could only stare. Everything about Quirrell was wrong. The stammer had vanished. So had the nervous hunch, the watery uncertainty, the apologetic flutter of a man who seemed perpetually startled to find himself in a room. He stood straight now, his expression composed and almost amused. Dark eyes bright with a confidence so complete it seemed to have been carved into him from underneath. "You," Harry said. Quirrell inclined his head. "Me." The chamber smelled faintly of smoke and old stone. Harry's hand went at once to his wand. Quirrell laughed softly. "I wouldn't." Harry stopped. There was no threat in the tone, which made it more dangerous than shouting would have been. "Snape," Harry said, because his mind still struggled to set familiar pieces into new order. "Has been trying to protect you all year," Quirrell said. How very trying that must have been for him. The words dropped like a floor vanishing underfoot. Harry remembered the broom, the binding countercurrent, Snape's fixed stare. He told himself savagely. Duh. Quirrell stepped aside, revealing the mirror in full. "Come here, Harry." The use of his first name from that mouth revolted him. Yet something far worse held him in place, understanding. The mirror. The stone. Dumbledore's design. Quirrell did not know how to reach it. "What do you want?" Harry asked, though he knew. Quirrell's smile thinned. What everyone wants in the end. Power sufficient to correct the insult of death. He looked, not at Harry, but at the mirror. "Unfortunately, your headmaster has a taste for flourishes. The stone is hidden where only one who seeks to find it, not use it, may obtain it. And since my motives are somewhat less abstract than his," he gestured, "you will be useful." Harry moved to the glass because there was nothing else to do. His reflection stared back, thin, pale, 12 years old and trying desperately not to shake. But behind the reflection something shifted. He saw his parents for the briefest fraction of an instant. Then the vision altered. His reflected self smiled faintly and slipped a small red stone into his pocket. Harry felt a corresponding weight settle, all at once, against his own hip. His breath caught. "Do not react," he thought, every nerve in him singing. "Do not look down. Do not reach." "What do you see?" Quirrell demanded. Harry grasped at the first lie available. "I see myself shaking hands with Dumbledore. He says I've won the House Cup." Not his most elegant deception. Yet Quirrell, tense with greed, seemed ready to wring prophecy from any ambiguity. "Let me see." He shoved Harry aside and stood before the mirror, muttering. Harry edged backward, hand inching toward the pocket where the stone now burned like an ember through cloth. Then a voice spoke. It came from nowhere Harry could place and everywhere at once, high and cold and hideously intimate. "Use the boy." Harry froze so completely his bones seemed to ring. Quirrell's hands flew to his turban. His face had gone gray with anticipation. "Yes, master." Slowly, reverently, he unwound the fabric. Beneath it, on the back of Quirrell's head, a face stared out where no face should be. It was flat and chalk-white, with red eyes glittering in deep sockets and slits for nostrils like a snake's. Not fully alive. Not fully dead, but something clinging to the idea of flesh by force of hatred alone. Harry's scar exploded with pain. There are moments when terror is too large to feel all at once. It arrives in pieces. First, the impossibility of the sight itself. Then the comprehension that this was the thing from the forest, the thing that had drunk unicorn blood. Then the deeper horror, that it had ridden beside Harry all year, speaking through a teacher's body, waiting. "Harry Potter," whispered the face. The voice slid through him like poison through water. You see what I have become. A shadow. A parasite. Less than spirit. Yet there are ways back. Ways to restore what was unjustly taken. Men. They show. Harry's hand closed around his wand. He had no plan. Plans belong to people with time. Quirrell moved faster. He seized Harry's wrist. Agony tore through Harry's scar and down his arm in one blazing line, but Quirrell screamed too. Smoke burst where his fingers touched Harry's skin. The professor jerked back as if scalded. For one stunned heartbeat, both of them stared. Then Voldemort hissed, "Kill him, you fool. If you cannot touch him, break him." Ah! Quirrell's face twisted with pain and obedience. He drew his wand and fired a curse that shattered stone where Harry had been a split second before. Harry ducked behind the mirror, chest hammering. The chamber rang with impacts. Chips of marble stung his cheek. He had to get the stone out. He had to get to the others. He had to survive long enough for any of that to matter. Think. Quirrell rounded the mirror, wand up. Harry slashed his own wand in blind desperation, shouting the first spell that came to mind. Expelliarmus. The disarming charm struck Quirrell's shoulder rather than his wand. It spun him half round but did not disarm him. He laughed and the sound had gone ragged with fury. Very good. Again. Harry backed away. His heel struck the plinth beneath the mirror. The red stone thudded in his pocket, absurdly heavy. Without thinking, he reached for the older language under the wand and spell, the one that had saved him before he knew its name. Not power. Shape. Intention. Not close, he thought as Quirrell lunged. The hem of Quirrell's robe snagged around a broken fragment of plinth and jerked him off balance. He crashed sideways, cursing. Harry did not pause to marvel. He ran. The chamber was too small. Quirrell recovered at once, face dark with a hatred no frightened professor could ever have contained. Curses tore blue-white gouges in the walls. Harry answered with whatever his wand and desperation could produce. Shields that half-formed, a jinx that shattered in an urn, one stunning spell that went so wild it only made the torches gutter. "You cannot fight me, boy," Voldemort whispered from the back of Quirrell's skull. "You are nothing but a child." Harry believed it. He was a child. He was frightened. He was tired. He had no genius plan, no secret training, no hidden inheritance of elegant dark power. What he had was a scar burning on his forehead, a stone in his pocket, two friends behind a wall of enchanted fire, and the suddenly crystal memory of Quirrell screaming when he touched him. His mother, some remote clear place in him said, his mother did that. Quirrell came again. Harry dropped his wand. The choice shocked even him, but there was no time to reconsider. He launched himself forward barehanded and caught Quirrell's face between both palms. The scream that ripped from the professor's throat did not sound human. His skin blistered under Harry's touch, blackening and cracking as if acid had been poured over it. The smell was horrible. Burnt flesh, burnt cloth, burnt something deeper. Harry cried out too. Pain slammed through his scar like a spike. Yet he held on because this, at last, was working. Quirrell convulsed, thrashing. He clawed at Harry's arms and where his fingers brushed cloth, smoke curled. Voldemort's face writhed on the back of his head, mouth stretched in a silent snarl of rage. Harry tightened his grip until tears ran down his own face from the pain. "Master!" Quirrell shrieked. Then Harry's strength went. Not will. The body simply reached its limit and began to dim at the edges. He felt himself falling. Heard, very far away, a voice like a great bell cracking the air. Saw a blaze of light fill the chamber from the doorway. And then nothing. He woke to white curtains and the smell of clean linen. For a brief, bewildered instant he thought he had died, and found the afterlife surprisingly medicinal. Then Madame Pomfrey bustled into view with a face fierce from relief and outrage combined, and Harry understood he was in the hospital wing. "You stay still," she ordered before he could form a question. "You've done enough." Quirrell, Harry croaked. Gone, said Dumbledore from the chair beside the bed. Harry turned. The headmaster looked more tired than Harry had ever seen him. Not weak. Dumbledore would never truly resemble weakness, but weighted, as if he had been forced to carry too much sorrow in too little time. Voldemort escaped, Dumbledore said. He has many talents, among them the ability to abandon failing servants with impressive speed. Harry closed his eyes. Relief and disappointment tangled strangely inside him. The stone? Destroyed. That surprised him into opening his eyes again. Destroyed? Nicholas Flamel and I had a long talk. We concluded that this particular source of temptation had outlived its usefulness. Harry absorbed that. In the silence that followed, one question rose above all others. Why couldn't Quirrell touch me? Dumbledore's face gentled into something very near grief. Because your mother died to save you. She left upon you a protection rooted in love, and such magic is both older and stronger than most wizards care to admit. Quirrell, with Voldemort inhabiting him, was full of the opposite. It burned him. Harry looked at his own hands lying against the blanket. They seemed absurdly ordinary. I did things before school, he said quietly. Without a wand? Mrs. Figg knew. Maybe you knew. But this, he swallowed. This wasn't me. No, Dumbledore said. This was not your talent. It was Lily's gift, freely given through sacrifice. Harry stared up at the canopy. Then why do I... He searched for the shape of the question and found a deeper one. Why did you leave me there? Dumbledore did not pretend not to understand. At Privet Drive, Harry nodded. Because, Dumbledore said after a moment, when your aunt took you in, despite all her bitterness and fear, your mother's blood sealed a protection around that home. While you can still call it home, Voldemort cannot touch you there as he touched you in that chamber. He folded his hands. It was never kindness, Harry. It was necessity. That does not make it painless. Harry let the words sit. They did not comfort him. They did, however, fit pieces into place. You asked once whether you were strange, Dumbledore went on. You are unusual, yes. A child who learned too early that power might be needed in silence often develops attentiveness. But a gift is not destiny, nor is suffering a curriculum I would ever choose for a child. His blue eyes sharpened. Your wandless ability may grow. It may become formidable. That matters less than whether you govern it or allow it to govern you. Harry thought of the mirror. Of Petunia's fear. Of Quirrell burning in his hands because of something his mother had done out of love, not rage. He understood then, dimly but truly, that mastery might not mean making the world answer. It might mean deciding when not to ask. Dumbledore rose. At the curtain he paused. By the way, he said, and a flicker of mischief returned to his voice, you did indeed help win the House Cup. Your lie to Quirrell was, in retrospect, only premature. Harry laughed despite everything, and the laugh hurt, and because it hurt it felt real. Dumbledore had not lied. Harry returned to the Great Hall in time for the leaving feast, and though his limbs still felt as if they had been replaced by borrowed versions of themselves, he arrived to a room alive with summer and rumor and the warm riot of school, and green and silver banners draped the walls for Slytherin's victory. The sight produced a polite disappointment in Gryffindor and a distinct smirk in Draco. Then Dumbledore rose. The hall quieted by slow degrees, as a sea quiets under falling night. There are, he said, all kinds of courage. By the time he finished awarding points, for Hermione's cool use of intellect, for Ron's sacrifice on the chessboard, for Harry's nerve, for Neville's bravery in standing up to his friends, the green had vanished in a sweep of magic, and crimson and gold poured from the rafters. The hall erupted. Ron stared at the banners as if he suspected a prank. Hermione, for once, forgot composure altogether and laughed so hard she had tears in her eyes. Harry sat between them in the thunder of applause. and felt something settle into him more deeply than triumph. He belonged to these cheers, not because of a scar, or a prophecy he did not yet know, or some strange talent people whispered about in corridors, but because he had stood in danger with others and had not stood alone. The train home carried all three of them in a compartment littered with sweet wrappers and the melancholy brightness of ending. Fields rolled past in green and gold bands. Ron talked until words ran down into a companionable silence. Hermione read half a chapter of her holiday texts and then, astonishingly, put them away. At one point, she fixed Harry with the stern look she generally reserved for theoretical catastrophe. "You know you mustn't do magic over the summer." Harry looked out the window. "Even if I don't use my wand." Hermione hesitated. "The Ministry detects underage magic in general, not merely wand use. In places where adult wizards are present, it gets complicated, but at your aunt and uncle's house." Her expression softened. "Please don't get expelled before second year." Ron leaned forward. "Have you really been doing that stuff since you were little?" Harry considered denying it, saw no use, and shrugged. "Some of it." Ron whistled. "Brilliant." "It was not brilliant," Hermione said. "It was unsupervised." Harry laughed. He could not help it. Hermione huffed, but her mouth twitched. At King's Cross they parted in noise and sunlight and promises. Mrs. Weasley hugged Harry as if she had always known she might. Fred and George asked whether setting a professor on fire counted as advanced coursework. Ginny Weasley, hidden half behind her mother's skirt, stared at Harry with enormous eyes, and looked as if she wanted to ask 100 questions, but could manage none. Then the barrier was behind him, and he was back in the ordinary station where no one looked twice at owls or trunks, because magic had resumed its old habit of hiding from those who did not wish to see it. The Dursleys waited near the car. Vernon had the same walrus mustache, the same purple neck, the same expression of perpetual injury. Petunia stood rigid in a pale blouse, gloved hands clasped around her handbag as if it were a shield. Dudley had acquired a summer shirt patterned with lurid stripes and a new uncertainty in the eyes. They looked smaller than Harry remembered. Not physically. Vernon still occupied space like a territorial animal. But scale is a trick of knowledge. Harry had seen a castle older than their entire street, a dragon hatchling, a three-headed dog, a dark wizard clinging to life by hatred. He had stood before death, and known it looked less impressive in person than in stories. Privet Drive could no longer fill the whole horizon. Petunia's gaze landed on him first. It flicked at once to the owl cage, the trunk, the wand hand she could not help tracking. Her mouth thinned. "Well," Vernon barked. "Get in, then." On the drive back they asked no questions about school. Vernon delivered a speech about no funny business under his roof. Dudley watched Harry in the rearview mirror, and looked away each time their eyes met. Petunia said nothing at all. Yet as the car turned onto Privet Drive, Harry felt it. A warmth just under the skin of the air, subtle as sunlight through closed eyelids. The house itself shimmered at the edge of perception. Not with his own magic, with his mother's. Blood and choice and old sacrifice layered into brick and mortar until home, however unwillingly named, became a fortress. He sat very still while the realization washed over him. He had hated this place for years. He would hate parts of it again before summer ended. Yet in a world where murderous shadows could slip from the backs of men's heads and wait in forests for blood, the fact of protection mattered whether or not one loved its shape. Vernon hauled his trunk up the path with bad grace and nearly dropped it when Hedwig gave a warning hiss from her cage. "Control that thing." "She's an owl," Harry said. "Not a thing." The answer slipped out before he could soften it. Vernon turned, outraged, but whatever he saw in Harry's face checked the bellow on its way up. Perhaps it was simply that Harry no longer flinched in advance. Perhaps it was that Hogwarts had taught him the difference between authority and volume. Perhaps Vernon sensed in the opaque animal way of bullies that the balance he had always relied upon had shifted. "Just," Vernon said finally, "none of your nonsense." Harry almost told him that nonsense had saved his life more than once that year. Instead, he carried Hedwig inside. The second bedroom remained his. Dudley's broken toys still lined one wall in a monument to former tyranny. Harry set down his trunk, opened the window for Hedwig, and stood in the late afternoon light while the neighborhood droned with distant lawnmowers and ordinary human concerns. He touched the pocket where his wand rested. For a moment, the temptation rose, bright and childish, to make the curtains snap shut when Vernon shouted downstairs, to send Dudley's new television blaring static, to call every hidden suite in the house into a heap on the landing and watch Petunia try to explain it. Power, once tasted openly, invites use. The invitation was especially strong now that he knew how often he had answered it in ignorance before. But another memory came to meet it. Dumbledore beside the covered mirror. Quirrell burning under a love Harry had not cast himself. Hermione saying you don't have to win, only stop him long enough. Mrs. Figg's spidery warning. McGonagall insisting that talent was not permission. Harry drew his hand away from the wand. Below, Dudley's footsteps thumped uncertainly on the stairs. A shadow paused outside Harry's half-open door. When Dudley leaned in, his usual jeer was missing. "Dad says you're not to do anything," he muttered. Harry looked at his cousin. For years, Dudley had been the center of the house's orbit, all appetite and entitlement, while Harry moved around him like debris. Now Dudley's bravado seemed oddly fragile, as if it had depended entirely on Harry remaining smaller. "I know the rules," Harry said. Dudley lingered, suspicious. "You're not allowed, are you?" Harry thought of the ministry, of underage magic, of invisible traces in the air. He thought too of much older rules, the ones written by sacrifice and choice, not by bureaucrats. "Not here," he said. Dudley processed this with visible relief and equal disappointment. He shuffled away. Harry sat on the bed until twilight turned the wallpaper blue. Hedwig returned and settled on her perch with the sound of feathers folding into silence. From downstairs came the clink of dishes, Vernon's grumble, Petunia's brittle reply. Normal life, pretending itself sufficient. Harry opened the window wider and looked out over Privet Drive. The summer ahead would not be easy. Nothing had changed the Dursleys into kinder people. Petunia would still look at him sometimes as though Lily's ghost had come to supper uninvited. Vernon would still thunder and bluster and attempt to reduce the unknown by shouting at it. Dudley would still test the borders of his old dominion. Yet none of them could put him back beneath the stairs. None of them could unteach what the year had taught him. He knew now that magic was not a punishment and not a secret disease. He knew that a wand steadied him but did not define him. He knew that his strangest ability had been forged partly by fear, which meant he must be careful what feelings he let train it next. He knew that love, his mother's, his friends', perhaps even the fierce, peculiar affection of people like Hagrid and Mrs. Weasley, could shape power into something no dark wizard understood. Above the neat roofs of Privet Drive, dusk spread like ink across water. Harry rested his forearms on the sill and let the evening air touch his face. The wards around the house hummed faintly, gold without color, a silent inheritance circling him in the dark. This time, when the world answered, it did so only with stillness. Harry accepted the stillness, and for the first time in his life, it did not feel like helplessness. It felt like choice.